Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to this week's episode of The Formula. My name is Trevor Carlson, and I will be your host this evening. Our guest this week is Matt Winegarden from Handrail. Matt and I go way back. We've been friends for quite a while, and he originally, him and I met as I went through the Iowa Startup Accelerator with a startup that I was working on at that point in time, and he was the user experience mentor for the accelerator. Matt and I had a lot of great conversations during the program. We continued to stay in touch afterwards, and he's been really helpful when it comes to understanding what a user needs to do and why when building a product. Matt and I really touch on different points, how you can use these user interviews or customer discovery to apply to your sales process, how you can test out different ideas before ever launching your product, and really just all kinds of different things. We go into some stories that he's had in the startup world with successes and failures. So without me rambling along any further, let's get this show started with Handrail's Matt Winegarden. Matt, thank you for being a guest on today's show. So you spend a lot of your time talking with customers and really advocating for customer discovery. If someone came up to you and asked you how to get started to figure out if somebody wanted or needed their product, how would you tell them to do so?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, honestly, I would just start off with have conversations with people. You know, the conversation, I believe, is sort of the foundational fuel to user research. If you can't talk to people, if you don't understand people, then there's no way, in my opinion, that you can create a product or a service for a person. So my basic advice to everybody is just do it. Get on the phone, get in front of people, have a conversation. And the more you do it, the easier it's going to be.
What types of questions are you asking those people when you have them on the phone? Is it what types of problems are you dealing with? How are you dealing with them? Can you give us a couple examples?
So kind of back down to the foundational ideas. A lot of it is open-ended questions, right? You hear that all the time. You want to try to get people to tell a story or to talk about what they're doing. But I think the most important question is really why. So if you can understand their point of view, if you can understand kind of where they're coming from, that's really going to help you. So a lot of people get really hung up on sort of the creation of questions or what the perfect question is. And you can read books up and down, about how maybe to form the question to get kind of what you're looking for, maybe the best insight. But I think, honestly, the best question is why, and then continuing to kind of dig into that is really the best question, in my opinion.
So you ask someone, what problems they have and why, and then you get some type of answer, information, or a story. What do you do with that information after that?
Well, to even back up, I don't even like to lead off with the problem. What problems are you having? I might lead off with something like, can you tell me the last time that you did something? Okay, well, why did you do that? What were you trying to do? Really kind of dig around the motivation for them to do that, the outcome that they were trying to achieve. And then it kind of depends on what I do with that information. So if it's just for me, for my understanding, sort of an empathetic point of view, I'll use that just for my own needs. But if I'm trying to drill down to the point of the problem or the pain point, to help sort of figure out what product or service I might be able to build off of that pain point, that can help inform that. But it depends. It could be something for the development group. It could be something for marketing. It kind of depends on the phase that I'm at and what I'm doing at the time.
Yeah, it's almost dependent on where you're at with where the product's at. If it's brand new versus if it's something that existing that you're tweaking or building features out for. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, if I'm in what I would call the challenge phase, which is I'm trying to identify really what is that core problem, right? So I might be trying to build my case of, okay, well, here's enough information for me to be able to move forward. If I'm in the development phase, which is much later on, then I might be using that type of information to understand what I might want to create or add next, or even get information maybe on the thing that I built. Is this actually satisfying that particular need? Are they able to use it? Am I matching up what I found out earlier in the challenge phase, to what I actually created?
So I'm assuming that you've done quite a few of these at this point. I mean, I know you did a lot with Handrail and probably at Connect 5 too, and you've walked a lot of early stage startups through the process. So when you're conducting a customer interview and you're having that conversation and you ask them a few different questions and you hear some things that don't necessarily line up with either where you're going with the product or where you're thinking of going with the product, what do you do?
It kind of perks my ears when I either hear something that, and let me back up. So I try not to go into a conversation with a particular bias. Like I want to hear or I want to confirm this particular thing. Because for me, I think that's a dangerous way to think. If you go into what I would call a research activity of having a conversation with somebody with the explicit, like, here's what I want to learn, here's what I want to understand, you start to bias yourself and the conversation towards trying to prove or disprove that particular thing, right? So I try to keep it more open of I'm going to go into this conversation to either understand more about their wants or needs or pain points. And then if I hear something new that I either haven't heard before or maybe doesn't jive with, other things that I've heard, I kind of take it as a 1-point piece of data. If I hear it again and it starts to become a pattern with other people, I may act on it. But if it's just a one-off thing, that was interesting, but is it actionable? Is it something I want to do with that? So I kind of categorize it in different ways until I hear a similar thing, and then that starts to give me confidence that, okay, well, maybe we need to actually do something with that piece of information.
So how many times do you have to hear something before you recognize it as a pattern? Is there like, okay, if we hear this 10 times, or if we hear this 3 out of 10 interviews, then we're starting to see like some type of pattern or some type of, what's the word I'm looking for, where it actually means something versus it's just kind of like an outlier?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think there's a lot of opinions sort of on that idea of what's sort of the magic number, before you can feel confident to be able to make a decision or know that, okay, well, now this is a pattern or a theme. To get really nerdy, some people will say that you need to have, a statistical sampling of what your audience might be. But that means it could be 100,000 people that you have to hear that thing from, right? So if you want to stick with sort of the statistical portion, there's a thing that's called a confidence interval. So there's crazy math that tells you that you can be 95% confident based on the number of people that you've spoken to that represents what your customer base might be. But there's other logic out there that says typically talking to 5 to 10 people within your customer archetype or your persona representation is enough. So if you hear that particular thing, repeated the majority of the time within that 5 to 10 person or representation, that's typically enough. So it also kind of depends on the situation too, right? So if it's a very major thing, whether it's a new feature, new product overall, I want to hear from as many people as possible. I don't want to hear from just 5 or 10 people. I want to hear this repeated over and over and over and over and over again. But if it's a small decision, like what color should we use, on a button or whatever, and I hear, I don't like that particular color, then you can go that. And that's a bad example, but I think it just kind of depends on the gravity of the decision that might be made.
So the root of all of this stuff is user experience, right? Or user experience.
Yeah. So some people might call it design thinking. Some people might call it user experience. I've even heard some people call it high-tech anthropology. So it's really trying to understand people and how they interact with digital and physical products. And really what it boils down to is behavioral science, honestly. It's what do people want? What do people need? What do people desire? How do they interact with products and services? And then how do you make sure it fits what's called a mental model, right? So how people think about things and think things should work. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of names out there, but it boils down to behavioral sciences.
I mean, that sounds like a pretty fun way to spend your day, just talking to people and trying to understand how they work.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I started off honestly in sales. So I got to learn pretty quickly about how people think, what people want, how to have conversations, and I've always enjoyed it. So, with kind of the path I've taken to get to this particular point, I've always found it sort of fascinating to understand how people think because we're all a little bit different. But when you start to see some similarities in basic human behavior and you kind of make those breakthroughs, it's a pretty cool thing to be a part of. So yeah, I enjoy it.
So you said that you got started in sales, and really you really like to talk to people. You enjoy the conversation, kind of getting to understand where they're coming from and how they really think about things. What got you interested in that in the first place?
Honestly, it was out of necessity. So I'm a college dropout. And the reason is because I got married at a young age, met my beautiful wife. We started a family, and sales was really the best way that I could provide for my family. So I went into commission sales starting at Sears a long time ago. Commission sales is kind of a jump into the deep end of the pool to figure out how to support your livelihood, right? So when I have a new family that's coming up, I had to learn really quickly what people want, what people need, and how to have conversations with them. So yeah, kind of starting off there, it was just, like I said, at a pure necessity.
I feel like you're probably pretty decent at sales, just judging by how well you handle conversations now. How'd you do?
I was pretty good. Yeah. So, but I also have a different philosophy about sales. There's sort of the way that people think about commission sales people, car salesmen and a lot of pressure and whatever. But what I learned early on is, some pretty basic tactics that it's low pressure, right? So it's asking them simple questions like, what are you looking for? What do you want to use it for? So people talk about customer discovery and really digging into the whys and the whats. I didn't think about that, but that's exactly what I was doing. So for example, when somebody would come in and they'd be looking at big screen TVs, I'd ask them stupid questions like, so you're looking at a TV today, right? Just to kind of break the ice to start the conversation. But I would try to find out what might sound stupid, but how are you going to use this TV? Just the answer of, well, I'm going to watch TV. Well, we use it a lot for watching movies with the family, or, I have my friends come over and we watch sports. Oh, awesome. So now if I understand how you're actually going to use that device, then I can say, here's how I can relate it to you. If you have a bunch of friends come over and you guys like to watch football on Sunday, you're also going to want a sound system that's with that as well. So here's how I can enhance your experience of watching television. And once I figured out that I can, relate to people and then match people with what they want, it was much easier because it wasn't my motivation to sell anymore. It was understanding their motivation so I can match with their needs. And that honestly is the foundations of what user research and customer discovery is all about.
It sounds like just being a good listener and trying to match up what you have with what they actually need or want, which I think a lot of people miss that. They're like, well, how can I get this person to buy my thing instead of how can I help them with whatever problem or give them the right or get them the right TV for the right experience. You know what I mean?
I'll give you a practical example, and it's really, really simple. Why do you buy a bed? And I'll throw that question to you.
Because I need something to sleep in.
Exactly. You buy a bed to sleep in it, right? So that's sort of the core value of what that particular product is. You're using it for sleep. You're using it for rest. So if you understand what the core value of that particular product is, when you're talking to somebody, a customer, a user, a buyer, whatever, if you can identify what the core value is they're looking for, it could be productivity. It could be communication. It could be relationships. It could be whatever the thing is. But when you understand and get to that core value, then it's easier to go, okay, if this is what they're looking for, then here's an efficient way for me to deliver that core value. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of want to go down this path a little further with the bed example. So let's
Sure.
say that you are conducting a customer interview around like either making a new bed or figuring out something about the bed that you're trying to make. Because I think it's really interesting when you can really dive into the process and understand how the conversation actually works. Do you wanna give that a shot?
Yeah. So like if I'm doing a customer discovery interview to try to find out how people rest or people sleep.
Yeah, however you think that you would approach it is, I mean, if a bed is a little bit too arbitrary, or not arbitrary, but a little bit too much of a specific example because, beds already exist, people kind of know how they work. But if you just want to kind of walk through the process a little bit of how you would conduct an interview to really get to the root cause of a specific problem that you're trying to really draw out of your interviewee.
Yeah, no, we can definitely still use a bed. So, because again, I think it's a pretty simple example that everybody can relate to. I believe that there is a better way for sleep or for rest than the current solutions that are out there, right? So, if for some reason, water beds, regular mattresses, the air infused sleep number, beds, it's not cutting it because I have a hypothesis, for example, that that those type of delivery methods, that's kind of a weird way to talk about, a bed, but it's a benefit delivery method, right? You buy the bed to get sleep, that's the benefit. But if I believe that that particular delivery method can be improved upon, where I start, I want to go talk to people to tell me about sort of their sleep and their rest patterns, right? So, what are they currently like about their bed? And I might be straight up asking them about that too. So, tell me sort of about your sleeping experience, I might ask. And, kind of depending on where the conversation goes, it could be, well, I'm a pretty restless sleeper. I roll around a lot. I tend to sleep on the edge of the bed or maybe middle, or they might talk about how their mattress sags. So what I do is then I start to compile all of this information, the primary research that I'm doing, so the face-to-face or customer discovery, that's primary research, to identify, okay, what are the pain points? What are the problems? What are the things that they're wanting? And then I'll also do secondary research too of what are the current solutions that are out there. And I think that's another big thing that people are either missing or skipping is you have to go out and you have to take a look at what are the current solutions and then match it up to, where are the gaps? So if somebody tells me that they're restless a lot, but I find out that the core problem of them being restless, for example, is they get overheated. Well, I'll start to look at solutions in beds of cooling, or maybe the opposite. People get really cold when they're in bed. Okay, are there heating options that are out there? What's good and bad about those particular options? And then I might even use those in some of the research questions that I go back to other people with.
So you start to get that information from them. You kind of get an idea of what their what their optimal bed is like, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of get that idea, and you start to paint that picture. So you have all that information. Then what do you do with that?
I think it's kind of a risk evaluation at that point. So do I do something with this information, like talk to people about a specific solution and maybe get some feedback on that? If it's not risky for me because I'm in the world of making mattresses and making beds, maybe I build a prototype or a first run of something to do a quick test to see if this is going to be a commercial thing. So I think it kind of depends on the tolerance of risk for me as an individual, and what I'm willing to do to go to the next level of testing or validate that this thing could potentially be an innovation or a better solution to what's out there. And some people might wrap this in the wrapper of an MVP, right? So you can go as small as maybe a landing page, right? here's a better way to restful night's sleep. And then you can talk about, here's the ways that you can get that. And then if you got a lot of interest, maybe that can help sort of define the market. But you have to be careful with that, in my opinion, and that could be a whole other conversation that we have at some point. But getting to sort of that validation as quickly as possible with whatever you're willing to risk is kind of the next point. And then you sort of have these stages of, okay, we're okay with this risk. Now let's put a little bit more into it. Are we going to move on? And so on and so forth, as you're continuing to talk to people, observe people, do secondary research, and just kind of continue that cycle until you have something that works, or it's time to kill it.
And the time to kill it part, that's we could have like an hour-long conversation about that alone. So I want to play a little bit of a devil's advocate here for a second. Devil's advocate, aka I'm gonna be an asshole for a second.
Perfect.
So I've heard this before from a few people when I've talked to them about customer discovery or customer interviews and just having conversations with your customer. And they'll say something along the lines of, well, Trevor, you know that quote by Henry Ford? If he would have listened to his customers, they would have told him that they wanted a faster horse. What do you say when people say stuff like that?
Well, first they need to check their facts, because Henry Ford actually didn't say that. I think that's one of like the biggest misquoted things that are out there. But I understand what they're saying. And even Steve Jobs is misquoted by saying that he never talks to his customers or his users, which is absolutely untrue. So I think going back to an earlier point is you have to be careful about how you use the information that you get from customers. Because if they tell you things like, I want a faster horse, what are they actually saying? They're saying that they want a faster way and more convenient way to get to where they're going, right? So sometimes you have to go a little bit like a layer or two deep, do a little bit of analysis on that, and be smart about it. I think there's a dangerous movement, in my opinion, for people that don't listen to other people. So I sort of have it in my head that while I might be a user, or a customer of my own product, I don't represent every single user or every single voice that's out there that would use my product or service. So when you're sort of in this silo thinking of, I'm not going to talk to anybody because it doesn't matter, I know better, I think that can lead you down to either an amazing failure or you just got really lucky.
Yeah, it's interesting when, because you can go really both ways on like listening to people versus not listening to people. And I think there's a healthy way to have conversations, like interview people, talk to your customers. But then there's also times when it's like, okay, well, I'm building this product or this thing to solve a problem that I have, or to I'm trying to think of the right way to say it, but it's almost like you have I can see a little bit of both sides, where like sometimes you just have to like take the information that you have and go do something. And I think a lot of people get stuck on like, well, I just need to go interview 100 more people, and I need to interview 100 more people after that, and then it's like 3 years later and they still don't have a product out, and
yeah.
then I don't know. So eventually, you just kind of have to take the information you have and make a decision. But I do think it is important to talk to people.
Yeah. So, and kind of another way to think about it, and just to make sure that people understand what I'm saying, because I think there is a danger in quantity, right? Just because you talk to 10,000 people doesn't mean that you actually have the right information. So you have to also talk to the right people. And then when you talk to those people, again, you have to make the decision on your own of what you believe is actionable things. What are you going to take action on, and what are you going to say, okay, that was interesting, but I'm not going to go down that road because that's not what I'm concentrating on. So it's kind of this labyrinth that you have to go through when you're doing user research, of parsing all of this information that you get of, okay, this is valuable to what I'm doing, or that's not valuable to what I'm doing, and don't necessarily let some of these conversations or some of these insights that you might get move you to other ways of thinking, unless, and this is a big sort of caveat to that, you get sort of that repeated thing over and over and over again to invalidate what your idea is on a mass market scale, right? Because if you're going to create something to not make money, it's just for yourself, great. But if you actually want to make a product or a service that you can turn into a business, you're still going to have to get people to buy it and validate that product or service or whatever that you're creating. So it's still important, whether it's an interview or somebody giving you cash, you're still theoretically talking to your customers, having a conversation with them, exchanging with them to say, yes, this is the right thing and this is what I want.
What's the biggest challenge for people to kind of get over that hurdle between, having enough information and making a decision to either start building a prototype, to start selling, to start doing those things? Because I feel like we've both seen a lot of people really get stuck in that information gathering phase.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So I definitely don't want to dissuade people from constantly gathering information, but you don't also want to get into analysis paralysis, right? Is the kind of cheesy way to say that of, I need more information. I need to constantly, because I'm not sure what to do. Sometimes you just got to make a fucking decision and go. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. That's fine. But at least you learned something, and then you can move on to be able to make another decision. So, it kind of comes back to, do you believe that you have enough information to make a decision and you're confident that you can do that? It doesn't have to be 100% confident, but at least enough where you can do something to, learn a little bit more to continue to go forward. Because I think that's one of the biggest things that will kill innovation in products and services is the forward momentum stopping. So you got to keep going forward. You got to do something. And you can't just sort of stay in that stuck state of not doing anything because you feel like you don't have enough information.
Yeah, that's not a fun place to live either, because it's, I think everyone feels pretty good when they can see progress happening or the ball moving forward, whatever analogy you want to use. And it can probably get a little bit disheartening when you're just interviewing people over and over again and you never actually make a call. So if somebody comes up to you and they're like, "Hey, Matt, I've done, a couple hundred interviews. I've iterated on the interviews. I'm starting to figure out how I want this thing to come together, but I'm not really sure what to do next." What do you tell those people?
Well, I asked them, what the plan is to move forward. And if they're literally stuck, they're like, I have no idea, then try to figure out what is the very smallest thing that I can do to validate this. So some people would consider it an MVP. I would consider it the sort of minimum viable test, not the minimum viable product, but the minimum viable test.
Can you give me an example of what you do for a test?
A minimum viable test could be a landing page. It could be as simple as a survey. It could be as complex as, cobbling together a bunch of different technologies that may not be your final solution. But what is that quickest, easiest thing that you are capable of doing, or a small group is capable of doing, hopefully for free, that you can continue to move forward as you continue to validate it? And, if it's you doing it yourself, the old Zappos, or, name 100 different companies that sort of did the Wizard of Oz stuff, where it was a lot of manual labor. And I think that's a great way to sort of prove sort of some of these businesses is do it on your own first. And then when it becomes, too overwhelming, or you have the problem of too many people wanting your services, then you can start to figure out, the automation portion of it or whatever. But do the smallest natural thing. And again, if it's manual labor, great, do it. At least people are using your service or your product or whatever it is.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take a shot at kind of describing or guessing at what a minimum viable test or minimum viable product could look like. It could be as simple as, let's say, this is the first idea that comes to mind, but like some like on-demand home cleaning service that you want to start. Putting up a landing page and putting up like a chat box or an email capture form. And then when people submit their email or start a chat, instead of having some like automated system that matches them up with some house cleaner or maid or whatever, they submit their information, maybe their address, phone number, when they want people to come, budget, stuff like that. And instead of you having like a staff on hand, you literally just like go find someone to like do it. Like you you throw up something on like Craigslist or whatever, or you like go do it yourself. Is that kind of like, is that a good example of a minimum viable test?
Well, I would even challenge that you can probably do that test with even less technology. So you can write a handwritten flyer with your telephone number on it and post it at a Hy-Vee or a gas station or whatever and say, house cleaning service, $10 an hour. And if you have nobody contact you, maybe you need to move on. But if you have a lot of people contact you, with that handwritten flyer, or you put something in Craigslist, or, so I try to dissuade people from starting out with the technology portion of it first. Like literally, what is the minimum thing that you can do? Maybe the minimum thing is going to your next door neighbor, knocking on the door and saying, hey, I charge $20 to clean your house. Are you interested? And then going to the next door and the next door and the next door, or to the dorms or any other like high area where that might make sense for, cleaning or whatever. And then you can start to advertise on Craigslist. I need a little bit of help because I'm super overwhelmed.
And I mean, and then taking it a step further in those conversations, you could tie in the why. So like, well, I would have you come in and clean my house, but, and you're like, okay, well, tell me more about that. Like, oh, I just don't want strangers in my house. Okay, well, what would make you feel comfortable with someone in your house? Like, or a stranger in your house? Like, just that way you kind of understand more about where your customer's coming from.
Yeah, it could be. And you also might find out that, if it's a huge block, for some people, then maybe you're not talking to the right people. Or, this is a word that people throw around too. Maybe it's a pivot moment because you find out that lawn care service is more important to people than in-home service because of, anxiety of strangers in their house or whatever the case may be. I think also what it comes down to, so we're kind of talking about techniques and we're talking about methods, but I also think that there has to be a drive, right? So if you really want something to be successful, you believe in this thing so much, then you're going to figure out how to do it. Whether it's going to be on your own, you're going to be using technology, or you're going to do whatever. If you really, really believe that there's a problem, a need, a whatever, and you're able to provide value to somebody that has that problem or that need, you're going to figure it out, and you're going to keep doing it until you're like, I can't do this anymore, or it becomes successful.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because I had heard another podcaster talk about that a little bit. Jaakko Willing. He says something along the lines of, I think I've repeated this on a few episodes now, so but if it's important enough, if something is important enough to you, you will find a way to get it done. You won't be like romantically attached to, well, if I'm going to get it done, it has to be done this way, and it has to be perfect, and it has to do this, and it has to do that. It's like, no, if it's important enough to you, like, you are going to figure out a way. You're going to adapt. You're going to make it do whatever it has to do to get the job done, or to solve the customer's problem, or to be the product that delivers the solution that they need.
Yeah, and I kind of think that, I'm kind of thinking about this recently, and I'm not sure I'm going to articulate it correctly, but typically the best either founders or entrepreneurs or whatever are the ones that are super passionate about that particular thing. So, for example, my wife works for the Arc of Southeast Iowa, helping mentally and physically handicapped individuals. and she's really passionate about helping other people, right? So when we talked about that and, her potentially thinking about how could she expand helping other people, we came up with the concept of Summerland, which is to help kids that have uh, sort of mental handicap in matching them up with resources in the community. But she and I are really passionate about helping people, and that drive, that passion for that particular, you can call it a vertical or whatever you want, can really, help you in your direction or being successful with that. But the reason that I kind of bring that up is there's a lot of people that are in it for the wrong reasons or wrong motivations. They, saw the unicorn that, got bought for $1 billion or whatever, and they're like, oh man, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to do a startup. I want to do this thing. And now I'm going to go find a problem to solve. And it's misaligned with their sort of core values and their core beliefs. And then they become dispassionate about it, or they're in it for the wrong reasons. So if you have a passion about a certain thing, so I nerd out about understanding people. I'm a relatively creative person. So this field I'm really passionate about. But if you're getting into, creating beds, but you don't give a shit about, helping people rest or helping people sleep, then why are you doing it?
Yep, I have been on that side of the that side of the coin before, where it's you're doing it like I've done it for the wrong reasons, because I thought that it was something I was supposed to be doing, or I liked the idea of the possible outcome. And I think that's like every time I've done that, it has blown up in my face. And I think it's a really great recipe for living a pretty unfulfilled life too, because you're really chasing some outcome that probably won't happen, or most likely won't happen. And you're really kind of like you're living out like some story that's somebody else that's somebody else's thing. Like, it's not necessarily yours. So it's like, how can you pursue something that really lines up with like the things you enjoy doing? Like, for example, I wanted to start a podcast for the longest time, but I didn't have any idea how. And part of me doesn't even really care how many listeners I get. I just enjoy talking to people. Like, I'm having a blast. And thank you for coming on today, Matt. It's been a good conversation so far. But it feels much better doing something like this than like I was working on the food cart company. I hated every second of that whole thing.
Yeah.
And I got into it because I was like, oh yeah, I like the sound of being my own boss and making good money. But, the whole process was just not fun. And I think people should really take more time to really see if they line up with what they're trying to pursue, or what they would think they want to pursue.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Don't just grasp at straws. Really understand, sort of yourself, what you like, what you're passionate about. And when you start to align that with, what you do for work, it makes your life more enjoyable and more fulfilling. When you feel like you're actually making a difference, in something that you really care about versus, motivations that don't really fill you up in the best way. And that's, why you see, either founders or CEOs or whatever, just job hopping all the time, because it's like, okay, well, it's a status type of thing, but, it's really not, it's not the passion that I have. And then they, some will end up doing philanthropic things because it's to help fill that void of, here's something that's really important to me, so I'm going to go out and do this thing instead. So yeah, if you get the opportunity to kind of marry both of those worlds, man, it'll work out.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So that I have a couple questions that have now stemmed off of that little short conversation we had. One is, I thought of the Guitar Hero story. And we don't have to talk about that, but if you'd like to, I think it'd be interesting to hear like kind of what happened, because you're working for that I guess, I don't know if it was still a startup at that point in time. And then, some stuff happened and you kind of you almost had to like start over, right?
Yeah. So quick background. I worked for a video game studio called Budcat Creations in Iowa City, Iowa. And, a little while after starting working there, they got purchased by Activision, so a big publishing company. And we worked on a lot of different Activision titles. Guitar Hero was one of them. And we're what's known in the game industry as a port house. So we sort of took the main title on one of the bigger consoles, like the PS3 at that time, and we made them work for the Wii or other things. And we got a little bit of creative input, but it was more of a sort of turn and burn type of thing. But anyway, I think a lot of kids, at least with my type of personality, thought that this was a dream job, right? You get to work at a video game studio, you get to create games, you get to play games, all day. But it's kind of like eating pizza all day. After a while, you kind of get sick of it. But it's still a really cool, creative environment. And then one day, I was coming back from a conference in Montreal, and there were security guards, and the studio shut down. We had 5 minutes to put our personal belongings in a cardboard box, and that was it. So I kind of working at Budcat, and I think this is true for a lot of people that worked there. It was a part of who we were, part of our identity, and it was a cool thing to say. We worked on the Guitar Hero series, and there's a bunch of other games we worked on too. But that was taken away from us without any say, right? They just shut us down, whether it was for tax reasons or whatever the case may be. The series was starting to go downhill, so they wanted to save money, whatever. But yeah, I kind of had to figure out then, what am I passionate about? What do I want to get involved in? And then how do I set myself up in the future to really not have that thing happen again, or if it does happen again, it won't be sort of as destructive to me or, my family. Because that was a rough time.
Yeah.
So, in the months of kind of figuring out what my next step was, I sort of figured out, some of the passions that I had with, and I guess that you could probably call Budcat a startup, but the creative side of creation, game creation and design, and I started a playtesting sort of branch or studio inside the game development studio, where I started to kind of connect some of the things that I learned through sales, human behavior and wants and needs, and started to look at that through the lens of user testing. But I didn't really think about it as user testing. It was how do people play games and what do they enjoy? So thinking about the creative side, the product development methodology side, and also sort of the user research side, I wanted to find that next thing that sort of combined all of those items. And I worked for a couple small startups that, I thought, hey, this might be the thing. And then eventually found user research and design studio I'm working for now, Connect 5. And it marries a lot of the things that I'm really passionate about. And it's actually a way better fit for me, how my brain works, what I'm passionate about than the game studio ever was. And that might be hard for some people to hear. Man, you were able to work at a game studio, whatever. This is way better. It's way more in line. And it gave me the opportunity to start working on a research management system, Handrail, that other people can start to use for user research and be able to harness the power of that user research to eliminate bad product experiences or bad service experiences. So, I pour myself not only into the consulting business with Connect 5 and helping people understand that user research is important and how to harness that, but then also, being able to work on a tool that other people can use to do that same thing. It's great. It's a perfect marriage.
Sounds like you've really found something that really lines up with where you want to be and your personality. So, Now I lost my train of thought because I was I was going to ask more about the Guitar Hero story, but I guess you really covered it all. I was gonna ask you what your takeaways and stuff were from that, but really you nailed it. So yeah, that'll bring us to the last part of our show. So typically, Matt, we just ask like our regular guests different questions such as, what's your daily routine like? What types of books have been the most impactful for you? Maybe something that you learned recently that you felt like was really impactful, and then any message that you'd like to leave the audience. So your daily routine, is there anything that you do on a daily basis or on a regular basis that you feel like gives you an edge or a leg up or allows you to really function better as a human being?
Man, that's a deep question. So I think from a professional side, something that's sort of just been ingrained in my brain is thirst for knowledge. So if I'm working, with a business or a client or working on Handrail, I'm trying to absorb as much information as possible so I can be a better product design manager or a better user researcher or, a better consultant to clients or, be more empathetic to the people that might be using user research tools and want an easier way to do it. So professionally, I'm always looking for ways to learn, ways to grow, ways to be better so I can better serve. In my personal life, besides trying to be the best husband and the best father that I can be, I also find it super important to give back to the community. So I volunteer quite a bit, not only in the startup area as a mentor, but also volunteer with the ARC and other organizations because I think it's super important to give back. It's, we take all the time, but if you don't take a moment to give back, to reinvest in the community that you live in, yeah, I just think it's super important. So yeah, personal side, just trying to be the best husband and dad I can be, and then also give back to the community.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen you do that time and time again, whether it's mentoring new startups or working with like local entrepreneurial education programs. And I think that's pretty awesome to always see you there giving back and kind of helping others along their path. So I definitely owe you a couple a couple beers sometime. Well, maybe I've caught up on that, but for all the help you've given me in the past.
Yeah, man, I'm happy to do it. I think kind of looking backwards, I didn't really have a lot of mentors in, personal and professional life. So if I can give just a couple pieces of advice that might help somebody, I'm happy to do it.
So next question is, what do you think the most impactful book that you've read is?
Man, most impactful book. I'm not an overly religious dude, but I think the book "What Dreams May Come" has been pretty impactful for me in my life. There's also a movie with Robin Williams that's in it, but the book, in my opinion, is way better. I don't want to spoil anything about it, but I think it helped me take a look at life in a different way. What's important, what's not important, because there's material things, right? And everybody kind of chases that stuff. And the cheesy saying of you can't take any of that with you when you die. But I think for me, that was one of the most impactful books, especially since I'm not really a read for entertainment type of dude. I'll read user research books and I'll read psychology books and, all kinds of things for sort of my professional knowledge, I guess. But yeah, I think the What Dreams May Come book has been the most impactful for me.
I'll have to check that one out. I've never heard of that before, but I will add it to my list. So last thing, two things. One is, so you've done a lot of stuff in your life. You give back a ton, you mentor a lot of different startups. You've worked at some interesting companies. You've just launched this new product. I guess it's a little over a year old, right? Handrail?
Yep.
Yeah, so Handrail's been out for about a little over a year. My question for you is, what's next?
It's kind of an interesting thing. I think that we're we're kind of on the edge of a new movement, honestly, in product development methodologies. So, there's been a big swing from waterfall to agile, and a lot of organizations, a lot of groups are, sort of going along with that type of product development methodology, but there's pros and cons to it. And because of that big swing from waterfall to agile, I think that there's sort of a recentering that's about to happen. So I'm really kind of excited about that next wave of, instead of being product driven, which a lot of the agile and lean kind of methodologies really surround, is now going more towards a customer driven production methodology. So, with the customer discovery things that are coming up and the movements for lean startup and the startup weekends and everything, and sort of this resurgence of startups, it's exciting to hear people actually talk about customers needing to be put at the center of your product or service. So I'm excited about that movement. And with that, our organization and me fundamentally are trying to rid the world of bad product experiences. So I'm excited that people are kind of on board with that. So I see a lot of promise in not only the things that we're working on here, but there's a lot of opportunities for us and great products in the future. So I'm just excited to see what people are creating and throwing out there.
Yeah, I'm excited for that too. I feel like we're going to be seeing some really amazing products coming out in the next couple of years, especially with we don't have to get into all this, but all the different types of technology that are really rising up right now, and some changes that are currently taking place. Matt, I want to say thank you for taking the time to show up on this episode of The Formula, and I was just wondering if there was any message that you would like to leave our audience before we sign off.
Yeah, you're super welcome. Thanks for having me on here. I think the message is do what you love to do, and that will be your path to success. Find something that you're super passionate about. It could be an entrepreneurial or startup endeavor. It could be being involved with the community. It could be just being a dad. Whatever it is, do that thing and do it 100%.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is a wrap for this week's show. I hope you enjoyed the ramblings and stories that Matt and I shared throughout this episode, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and feedback moving forward. Now, if you think you would like or you would enjoy getting some other pieces of education from us, whether that comes in blog posts, podcasts, ebooks, or free online courses, go ahead and head over to helixacademy.co to sign up today. That's all for this week's show. My name is Trevor Carlson, and I look forward to you tuning in next week.